Hello and welcome to the New York Immigration Coalition's video on housing access and tenants' rights in Rochester, New York. My name is Kaya Groom and I am the Community Programming Associate at the NYIC. Today we will be discussing what your rights are as a tenant, services and resources that exist for tenants in Monroe County, how to protect yourself against scams and fraud, and more. As a reminder, this information is not legal advice and should not be taken as such. If you are in need of legal advice, please contact the Tenant Defense Project at 585-504-6195. Today, we will be hearing from Cassandra Bocanegra, the NYIC's Manager of Organizing and Strategy in the Finger Lakes region, and Masunmola Ojo, the housing attorney at JustCause New York. Welcome, Cassandra and Masunmola.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Massimola. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Great. Again, my name is Cassandra Bocanegra. I am the manager of organizing and strategy in the Finger Lakes, and for the New York Immigration Coalition. I do a lot of community organizing and community building within the Finger Lakes, as well as statewide, for different laws and campaigns focused on immigrant rights. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you, Massimola, about tenant rights as well.
Hi, my name is Musumola Ojo. I work for JustCause, and I'm the staff attorney for JustCause at just a housing unit. What do I do? Pretty much we provide legal advice, legal representation, but fully legal advice to tenants who needs help. Either they have cases in court, eviction cases in court, or they just want to know about their rights. And that's just the housing unit at JustCause. JustCause handles immigration, family law, and different aspects of law. But my role is the staff attorney at JustCause for the housing unit. Thank you.
Awesome. And we do have a few questions here that we're hoping we can work through and that you can maybe give us some more information on so that our community is just better aware.
Sure.
The first question that we have are, what are you currently seeing as reasons for eviction in the Rochester region?
Non-payment of rent, especially due to COVID, we've seen a lot of people that have cases being displaced for their home due to not being able to pay rent. As we all know that COVID affected a lot of us and people lost their jobs. People were not able to go back to work due to health reasons, due to them having COVID or due to childcare. So over the last 3 years, we've seen a lot of non-payment eviction cases, also holdover, but majority are non-payment because there are two types of eviction proceeding. Non-payment is when a tenant fails to pay their rent. Holdover is their tenancy is over. Pretty much either their lease has expired or the landlord just wants their property back and just terminate their tenancy. So we see those cases. Those are the vast majority of cases that we see. We also see illegal evictions. It's not common, but we get them. Either once in 2 weeks, a illegal eviction whereby landlord decides to change the locks, turn off the heat or electricity, board the windows in order to force the tenant to move out, or just pack their stuff and just put it on the outside of their home and change the locks. So we see that also, which we also say that it's also a constructive eviction, which are all illegal because a landlord has to go through the legal process, pretty much serve them with the proper notice. And if the tenant doesn't move out after that time, then go record, file the petition so that both the landlord and the tenants can have their day in court. And afterwards, the judge can issue a warrant of eviction or they can reach a deal. So pretty much this is the court process. But some landlords actually take laws into their hands, which we refer to as self-help. So we see that. We see a lot of cases involving just the warranty of habitability, meaning the house is not habitable. Infestation of mold, infestation of mice, Raccoons, we get that too, is not common. The raccoon is not common, but mice, the landlord refuses to make repairs. Maybe the ceiling is leaking, the windows are not closing properly, is letting out air, the heat stopped working, pretty much anything that has to do with threatening the health and safety of the home, like it's not safe to live, like it affects their health. We also get just cases whereby tenant just wants to know their right. Things like they want to break their lease, they want to move to another city, and they want to break their lease. Or domestic violence victims, they want to break their lease. Or situation a tenant just wants to move out. Those are the vast majority of cases that we actually, see.
Okay. And you mentioned that there are times where landlords um, threaten to like either change the locks or kick people out illegally, to commit evictions that are illegal. So what would our tenants' rights be if a landlord is threatening to lock them out?
So in such situation, the tenant should call the police, threatening to lock them out or already lock them out. So if they threaten to lock them, they can call the tenant defense. And depending on their situation, we can talk to them and provide them with legal advice on how to proceed in whatever situation it may be. Because even though when a landlord threatens to lock a tenant's house, it's like case by case. So it's just better to call the tenant defense. In a situation whereby the landlord already locked them out, they should call the police and afterwards call us. My take is also, for when a landlord starts to threaten, it's also better to keep like a form of ID that shows, or a form of like a letter or like a mail that shows that the tenant lives in such a place. Because when they call the police, most likely the police will ask, we need to prove that you actually live there. So call the police officer so that you can report it. Because sometimes the police officer will actually call the landlord and talk to the landlord, but in a situation whereby nothing is being done, or the tenants can call us and we can address the situation, pretty much provide information on the next step to take.
Okay, that's good to know. Um, so like locking a tenant out is obviously like not great for anyone involved, and especially for the tenant. Um, but does that fall under landlord harassment? And if it doesn't, what is considered like landlord harassment?
Um, we might count it as landlord's harassment. So landlord's harassment has different variation to it. That's why we strongly advise tenants to call us, to call the tenant defense, or just go on the website and complete a very simple form requesting for assistance. But in a situation whereby the landlord is coming to your house unannounced all the time, like or calling your phone every hour, pretty much, both day and night, trying to, that's also threatening. It's threatening to evict you, pretty much, when they're doing that, demanding for rent, because there's procedure, there are process that a landlord has to follow if they are demanding for it. So harassment can be things like landlord is texting you, calling you every 1 hour, or barging into your apartment every other day, like more like stalking. Those are definitely harassment. And in such a situation, we still tell tenants to call the police, especially when it's, harassment barging in, and call us, because there are steps that the tenants can take, such as just writing a letter to the landlord and things like that. But there are steps that tenants can take. But it's shown whereby the landlord is just sending a letter asking for rent, maybe every 1 month or every 3 weeks, we might or might not consider that as harassment, because they are sending a notice that is required by law for the landlord to send to the tenant before the landlord can commence a legal action in court.
Okay. So like a landlord calling you to request rent it's late, or like if it's coming up, that's not harassment. But if they're persistent about it, like annoyingly, like every hour on the hour,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
more harassment.
something like that. Because them asking about rent, some landlords can just call and say, "Oh, you're late on your rent. Please, do the needful." But if the landlord is now demanding every 1 hour or even every single day, it might be tagged as harassment, because instead of doing that, the correct route to take is to write a letter to demand for rent, because that's what is required by law.
Okay. So when we were talking about kind of like a landlord barging in unannounced, is the landlord allowed to enter your house without like letting you know, and like, or do they have to provide notice ahead of time? If so, like how much? And if they are coming in unannounced, um and it affects people's quality of life, what can they do? Like, can they call someone? Can is that basis for any further action?
If a landlord wants to come to an apartment, a house, or unit that they are renting to the tenant, a landlord is required to give at least 24 hours notice in writing. The exception is when there's flood or when there's an emergency. Emergencies such as fire, flood in the apartment, those are emergencies. Things that it's a matter of life and death or damage to the property. Those are emergencies. With that, the landlord is not required to give the 24 hours notice in writing. But in a situation whereby the landlord is not doing that and keep doing that, we still ask that the tenants to call the tenant defense, because there are, like I said, it's a case by case, and there are steps in which we can take that we can advise the tenants to take.
And when you say by writing, does a text message letting you know, does that count as in writing, or does it have to be a physical paper?
It doesn't have to be physical paper. It's just a form of notification, notifying the tenant that, okay, I'm coming in 24 hours, preferably in writing, put in a letter, like, and drop it or slip it under the door. Um, but things happen. Sometimes tenants are not there, so I believe email or even a text message might suffice, just a form of notification.
Okay, that's good to know. Um, if I'm a tenant and I'm struggling with paying rent, either because of like the pandemic, or just my like I've lost my job, or just whatever other life situation has happened, are there any rental assistance programs in Monroe County that could support me?
Right now, not that I know of, but if a tenant is struggling to pay rent or does not have an income and they can't pay rent, we still advise them to call 211 or call Department of Social Services.
Mhm.
211 and Department of Social Services, they will know the right direction to take in terms of, they have, especially 211, they have wealth of resources to be able to direct them to which organization in the community is providing help. We have all this church charity in Webster, in different part of Rochester, that assist. They have their requirement, by the way. And
Mhm.
I believe with what I've heard from our clients is that one of the requirements is you have to afford to pay rent going forward. But if you can't, there are some that may be able to help depending on the situation.
Hopefully no one ever gets to that point of having to call 211 for assistance. Um, but if for whatever reason, you mentioned earlier that you've also seen like infestations of mice, or like
Mhm.
unsafe living conditions. If a landlord doesn't like repair their home, or doesn't bring their home up to a standard that is quality of life for adults and children, what what are tenants' rights in that situation? Or like, what should they do if they don't have heat, hot water, electricity, or if they do find mold or lead in the home?
They should call code enforcement or neighborhood center. So in Rochester, in the city, they can call the code enforcement. But in the neighborhoods, they can still call the code enforcement for the city, and they will be able to direct them to especially in the suburbs, like in Brighton, Parenting, Webster, they have their own code enforcement that they call neighborhood service center. So they will be able to put them in the right direction. If it's threatening like lead, like maybe a child was taken to the doctor and they feel that they're exposed to lead, or the tenant realizes that, okay, I have a small child and there's lead in the house, it's very old apartment, things like that, and it's affecting the health and safety, they can still call the health department as well.
Okay, that's good to know. And those numbers are featured on the screen right now. The Monroe County Department of Public Health, as well as the City of Rochester Permit Department, and the website for the Rochester Neighborhood Service Centers.
A caveat is that just make sure that you continue to call them. Don't give up, because the thing is, when you call once and they don't answer, call again. Don't give up. Just continue to call until they send an inspector out, which is what we usually advise people on the hotline, until they call, and they will come. They inspect the place. Whatever they find out, they will take it from there, pretty much.
Okay. And should people take pictures or anything like of things that they see, just for evidence or anything like
They
that?
They could,
Okay.
but the inspector that they will send out will actually look. I've never, with what we've heard from clients, and I've called the hotline, is an inspector will come. They'll pretty much inspect the apartment or the house to see what's going on there.
Okay. Awesome. And would that be a situation where tenants could withhold rent, or are there situations where a tenant can withhold rent?
A tenant may withhold rent if there are conditions in the apartment that makes the place inhabitable, like infestation of mold, mice, but they've got to inform the landlord ahead of time of these problems and give the landlord time to fix it. We use the word reasonable time. How that is interpreted, it varies. But give the landlord reasonable time. Reasonable time might be different from during the summertime when there is no hot water, things like that. So, but giving the landlord an opportunity to resolve the issue. Then, if the landlord doesn't, a tenant may withhold rent for a period of time, must save the rent. And the tenant has to know that the fact that a tenant withholds rent does not mean that the landlord cannot commence a non-payment eviction proceeding in court. It doesn't mean that the landlord cannot demand for rent. It doesn't mean that the landlord cannot file the petition in court for non-payment. So it doesn't stop them, which is the reason why it's advisable for any tenant that intends to withhold rent to save, to keep it and don't spend the money.
Got it. And in that same line of talking about rent, are there any specific requirements for rent increase?
In Rochester, there is no limit to how much a landlord can increase rent in a private property, unless it's a subsidized apartment. With subsidized apartments, they are regulated by the government, pretty much. So the rent increase, they have their rule. But in terms of a general information, pretty much privately owned apartment that is not subsidized, that pretty much the government is now paying part of, subsidizing whatever it is that a tenant is paying, or low income tax credit apartment. So what I'm about to say applies only to privately owned apartment that is not subsidized or not low income tax credit. A landlord can increase rent, but if the landlord is going to increase the rent if the landlord is increasing rent, they are required to give a notice to the tenant, a form of notice, and say, I'm increasing the rent. But if the landlord intends to increase it by 5% or more, the landlord is required to give some type of notice. the number of days that the landlord has to give to the tenant depends on how long the tenant has been living there. So if the tenant has been living for less than a year and the tenant doesn't have does the tenant does not have a lease, they have to give a 30 days notice, just a 30 days. If the tenant has a lease, even if the tenant has been living there for less than a year, the landlord is required to give a 60 days notice if the landlord is increasing the rent for more than 5%.
Okay.
If the tenant has lived there for over a year but less than 2 years, is 60 days. If it is over 2 years, even if the tenant has a lease, but the tenant has lived there for over 2 years, the tenant has to, the landlord has to give a 90 days notice, an increase of 5% or more.
Okay. That's good to know. So when someone is signing for a new lease, are there any questions that they should be asking, or like anything that they should really make sure to include in the questioning as they're signing a new lease?
I'll say if a tenant is signing a lease, the tenants must be careful. Make sure they do their own research, their own due diligence. Make sure that you read the lease. First of all, make sure you research about wherever you are moving to. There are reviews online you can check. There is also, make sure you check the property and make sure that whoever is renting to you is the person that owns the property. And you can search for the name of, like in a private apartment, you can search for the owner whose name is on the deed. Like, you just want to make sure, because sometimes the landlord that is recorded on the deed is not the same person renting, because sometimes they will use a property manager. But you want to do your due diligence to call the person, because sometimes they will have the phone number, to call and make sure that, okay, this is the same person that really owns the apartment and that's their property manager. So you can even call the Monroe County to make sure that, especially a privately owned apartment, an apartment that it's like maybe 2 family house, 3 family house. That's the one. Sometimes we get scammed, like we get calls that people say, oh, they're renting to me, they don't own it, and I don't know what to do. Now I've given them 2 months worth of rent. So those ones, they're pretty much easy for people to search, call the Monroe County, and make sure that or even go online to type their address, it will show you who owns the property. Make sure you read through the lease, because all leases have conditions that you have to abide by. Some of them, you cannot smoke in the property. There are just several restrictions. Not a lot of restrictions, but pretty much there are conditions. Just make sure that, like, for example, there are some apartment that the rent is all is included, or there are some that you have to pay the amenities fees even when you don't use the amenities. Things like that. You want to make sure you read through it, and it's a condition that you can abide by.
Okay, and how much can a landlord request? Like, is it just the first month's rent and security deposit? Can they request like a full year to be paid in advance?
When a landlord is renting to a tenant, they are only allowed to, to get or to request for first month's rent and security deposit. There's nothing like 3 months. There's nothing like first month, last month, and security deposit. Prior to 2019, before the law changed, a landlord could request 3 months worth of rent. But post 2019, and we're in 2023, a landlord can only request for first month and security deposit. Sometimes they might ask for an application fee, but it can be more than $20.
We talked a little bit about scams and like frauds and just kind of things that have happened to tenants, or that you've experienced hearing from tenants. Is there any ways to protect yourself from scams and frauds, from housing scams and frauds?
Doing, like I said earlier, doing your research is important. Asking a family member, a friend, an acquaintance to just take a look, and especially if they are in Rochester and the tenant or the prospective tenant is not in Rochester, does not live in Rochester. So make sure that you look. Also, make sure that whatever you're giving to whoever you're giving it to, you're collecting receipts. You're collecting receipts, because that's what you're gonna use to, if you have to go to small claims in case there's a scam. Make sure that you ask the person who the person is, what's the person's role. It's okay to question, especially because you're putting your money down. Question and say, oh, who are you? Are you the property manager or are you the owner? And that's why you call the Monroe County, or you go online and search for the property. Reviews. One thing to do is reviews. When I was moving to Rochester, other than, even though I had a family friend on ground to go visit, to go do an inspection in the apartment, I read reviews, and it's very easy for you, especially in this world of technology. Just type in the address and put reviews in front. You're gonna see something come up. Just do your due diligence. Read up. Sometimes listen to your instincts too, because even though the law is not the instinct, but we all have an instinct when you're seeing that something is not right somewhere. Or if, for example, if they're asking for a 4-bedroom apartment and they're asking the asking price is $1,000. Realistically, that's not, something is fishy. If it's too, if the apartment is too cheap, if it's too cheap compared to all the other, like the market rate, which you can see the market rate, what other people are renting for similar place, because a 4-bedroom family house realistically in Rochester in this day and age will not go for $1,000. So if something is too good to be true, then you wanna dig deep to make sure, and ask for an inspection to inspect the place. A lot of people just waive, especially maybe they're coming out of the shelter, and because they really want to get out of the shelter into an apartment, they will waive inspection of the place, which you have a right to inspect before you move in. So don't waive the inspection. And the moment they give you keys, walk in and inspect the place around and make sure that this is what they promise you. Because if it is not something that they promise you, then it's better for you to turn around and, when that happens, just call the tenant defense. But prevention is better than cure.
Right. So in those instances, does a tenant have a right to break their lease, or when would a tenant have the right to break their lease?
For a tenant to break their lease, they have to look at their lease, the conditions. What does the lease says about breaking a lease? But according to the New York State law, a tenant may break their lease. The obligation is on the landlord to try to re-let the apartment. But until they do so, a tenant is responsible for the rent. But if the lease, most leases that I've read says, most of them usually say 60 days notice, is better you give them that 60 days notice. But domestic violence victim can break their lease, but just give us a call. Give us a call at Tenant Defense, then we'll be able to examine, because sometimes with breaking up the lease is case by case.
Right. Okay. And if somebody is a victim of DV or SA or any of the other anything else, does the law allow for any special like provisions or any special ability to break a lease if they need to, based on domestic violence or based on any other issues that might be occurring?
A domestic violence victim can break their lease. So the domestic violence victim has to give, in order to break their lease, must have a copy of the order of protection.
Okay. And
so a copy of the order of protection plus the notice, a 30 days notice to the landlord that they're moving out.
Okay. All right. And we did put the information for Willow Center. If anyone does need assistance with domestic violence, their website is listed below. And they're a great resource as well as a great organization. I don't have any other questions at this time. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of ins and outs, and while general information is great, if anyone has specific questions related to their specific case, they should be reaching out to to either JustCause at the Tenant Defense Project, or if they have any other questions, they can also reach out to JustCause in general. But I really appreciate all the information that you provided for us, and thank you very much. I know that these were some questions that a lot of people in our community have been wondering and have been like trying to figure out on their own. So we really appreciate you taking the time to sit with us and to illuminate some of the rights and the rights of tenants and kind of like the routes that we can take if anything does pop up.
Thank you. If anyone needs, especially in Monroe County, so the Tenants Defense will serve people in Monroe County only. So if you have any further questions, any issues going on with the landlord, and you just want to know your rights, or you have court, you need legal advice, our staff, we are there to talk to you. And because with some of this landlord tenant is very specific situation. So it's in order for us to be able to have one-on-one with you over the phone and provide you and with legal advice regarding your case or wanting to know your right, just call the Tenant Defense Hotline. Make sure when you call, if you don't get somebody on the phone, leave a voice message. We'll always call everyone back within 24 hours, as long as you leave a voice message.
Thank you both so much for sharing this valuable information. All of the resources that were included in this video will be listed in the video description, so you can directly access those links. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to the NYIC or JustCause or the Tenant Defense Project at the contact information that is provided on the screen right now. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you have a great day.